السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الذي لا إله سواه، الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه، حمدا يليق بجماله وجلاله وعظيم سلطانه وجزيل نعمائه، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف وأكرم أنبيائه سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين الطيبين وأصحابه الغر الميامين والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. آمين. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you, my dear brothers and sisters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open my heart and your hearts and the channels of our hearts, the hearing channels of our hearts, to anything that is said that helps us remember Him and helps us connect to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may He subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us with that to be of those who receive that joyfully, who internalize that, and who joyfully strive at least to practice that and actualize that. And it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whose hand is the ultimate tawfiq, is the ultimate grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would enable us either to receive properly or not, and to actualize properly or not. Allahumma inna nas'aluka at-tawfiq lima tuhibbu wa tarda. Secondly, please keep in your dua and in your thoughts and in your compassionate feelings those who are in need, those who are suffering anywhere of any sort, especially of our brothers and sisters. Keep them in your dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them relief and grant them expansion of their chests in the midst of the calamities and the challenges, sometimes very, very hard, of life. And today or last night I received news from about a very, very dear brother of mine from New York, from Troy, New York, Dr. Ikram Hasib, Professor Ikram Hasib, who is now in what they have termed in terminal stages. Please keep him in your dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him and grant his family and all of us steadfastness, and that as he always wished, and he was such a dedicated man, alhamdulillah, and a loving man and a caring man and a humble man. I have known him for over 30 years. He's a man who never changed. His character, his morality, his kindness, his devotion, his fidelity, his honor, he never changed, whether it rains or shines. Always compassionate, kind, loving. He's very highly intellectual, but very humble and very kind. I love him for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please do keep him in your dua, that Allah, as he always wished, that these moments, the last moments of his life, be in such that his heart is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So please keep him in your dua. In this today's encounter or seminar, inshallah ta'ala, as you know, it is about our preparation for this gift of Allah Azza wa Jal, that is the month of Ramadan. And alhamdulillah, to prepare in ways to remind ourselves of things we know and to learn things we don't know. And the more we know and review what we know, the better it is for us religiously to internalize that and to actualize that. because it's not about only knowing, as you know, my dear brothers and sisters, but it's about doing and practicing what we know, even if it were little. Practicing more is better than knowing more without practicing much. And that's the intent, to prepare ourselves, remind ourselves of what we know also, but hopefully also that something else, another dimension might be introduced this time that perhaps we were not aware about before. And I would divide that into two parts, as you know, one pertaining to what we call the fiqh of siyam, the outer dimensional aspect, or the fiqh of fasting, many of which many of you know already, and we know, but it's good to review those things and to know them perhaps from a different perspective, and if you have questions about those as well, inshallah ta'ala. And then the second part will be about, inshallah ta'ala, the spiritual dimensions in the ahkam and the practice, in the rulings and practice of fasting, especially fasting the month of Ramadan, because we have to link the physical to the spiritual. Ramadan is not simply a set of mechanical practices and outer practices, but it is much more than that, inshallah ta'ala, which we shall also review bi'idhnillahi ta'ala and remind myself and you about those as well. And I'm going to be, of course, if we were to do this at our ease, it would take days. As you know, that's the entire fiqh of siyam, externally and internally. It would take literally days. The seminar we used to do condensed in 2 days, but now we're trying to do them in 4 hours, inshallah ta'ala, to communicate as clearly and as simply the essentials of what we need to know about fasting in terms of the fiqh external and in terms of the inner dimensions as well. First, I quote Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the great Muslim scholars of centuries ago, that it is established amongst the believing men and women that whosoever does not perform the fasting of the month of Ramadan without due legitimate Shar'i reason, such as illness, that he said, in accordance to the well-established notion amongst all believers, he said that that person is worse than an adulterer and worse than an alcoholic. And even he said such person is, in accordance to the speculation of some other scholars, may not even be a Muslim. This is how serious the fasting of the month of Ramadan has become in our Islamic understanding. That's why we see in many Muslim countries, if not in all, some of us who have experienced that, people who are, subhanAllah, some would describe them, may Allah forgive us all, may Allah forgive us all, but I heard it described as factories of sins. But when it comes to Ramadan, they fast. Factories of sins, but when they come to Ramadan, they fast. Subhanallah. And that emphasizes what Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah ta'ala here mentions. That's one. Number two, I'm going to go through an outline of questions, some of which, as I said, alhamdulillah, we do know the answers either in general or in some specifics, but again, hopefully learning these again and again would help us more. Then the next question, بما يثبت الشهر. How do we recognize that the month of Ramadan has started? The usual question. بما يثبت الشهر. What determines that the month of Ramadan started, and therefore we must begin our fast. In other words, what is the sabab of wujubu sawmi shahri Ramadan? Technically speaking, what is the cause? What is the cause that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for the obligation of the fasting, beginning the fast of the month of Ramadan? And all of the ulama of old, all of them, rahimahullah ta'ala, all of them, I underline my words, our expert scholars of old, برؤية الهلال, by the sighting of the crescent, or completing the iddah of Sha'ban, completing the counting of Sha'ban as 30 days after having observed the sighting of the crescent of Sha'ban first, and then one keeps track of that. And if we did not see the crescent on the 29th day, it is after sunset of that month, if we did not sight the crescent of the month of Sha'ban, then Sha'ban would be 30 days. If we did not sight the crescent that is of the beginning of Ramadan and the end of Sha'ban, then we have to complete 30 days of Sha'ban, and after that the month of Ramadan begins, as related by Imam many A'imma like al-Bukhari and Muslim, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi, fa in ghumma alaykum fa akmilu 'iddata Sha'bana 30 yawma," as he said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which I explained to you. But also, not only said he that sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he said, "La tasumu hatta tarawu al-hilal, wa la tuftiru hatta tarawu al-hilal." This is even much more limiting and restricting, or better, much more clarifying of what the lawgiver through Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam intends from us when he said, what means do not begin to fast until you see the crescent, and do not stop the fast that is of the month of Ramadan until you see the crescent that is of Shawwal. And therefore the ulama unanimously, all of them, of all our expert scholars, say, all of them agree that this is the means by which we begin the fasting of the month of Ramadan. Anything else must be only subservient and subjected to this condition that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam laid very, very clearly. And therefore in our community here, and in many, many communities, we do not begin to fast until we know for sure that the crescent has been sighted, and not claims of sighting, but actually has been sighted. Claims of sighting are also checked, and we do believe, by exact science, not speculative science. There is speculative science, there is exact science. At the level of exact science, when we know that by modern and not so modern things that were known even centuries ago to our scholars, that if the fact of observation shows impossibility to see a crescent, then it does not count. But if it is within the realm of the probabilities of sighting the crescent, and there is claim of sighting reliable by eyewitnesses, then it has to be accepted. But we do not, and we should not, begin to fast disregarding the text of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his command. We must not simply say, we don't care about sighting, we can compute that, and once we compute it, then it is fine. No, we cannot do that. And we have shown previously that what is done currently, for example, in the United States, by those who follow only, I underline the word only, computation, they have done many, many things wrong, logically wrong, in Sharia-wise wrong, and proper understanding wrong. And we have explained that in many details of the things that I think almost all of you should understand, that what they are calculating, we're not against science, as you know. As I said, there is a difference between speculative science and exact science, number one. Number two, what they are computing is the following. For example, there are many things they can compute. They compute the fact that at sunset, somewhere, not necessarily in the United States, somewhere in Mecca, for example, that at sunset, the only condition they require is that the sun sets before the moon, before the crescent. If the sun sets before the crescent on that night, whether the crescent is sightable or not, whether the crescent is even sightable or not, that's the beginning of Ramadan for them the next day. This is a speculation. This is computing, not what even computing is not computing what is equivalent to what Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned, but if they were to compute what Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned, to attempt to do that is to do what? To compute when exactly it is sightable for sure. And they say we can compute that. If they can do that, scientifically, exact science, that cannot be done currently in modern science. And that the experts of science all know that. In terms of citing it actually, to compute that, it's not computable. What is computable are probabilities. And they do not even compute the probability that it is there to be sighted. But what they compute is when on that day the sun sets, and by computation, if the moon sets after the sun sets, even if it were a minute, which renders sighting impossible, they say we begin. So even computation is not computing, they're not computing what is equivalent to what Rasulullah ﷺ required when he said, do not begin until you see, and do not end until you see. If they were computing those probabilities, that's a different discussion. But what all of you don't know, or most of you don't know, is that they're not computing even that. But they are computing what I told you. And that I cannot go with. Rasulullah ﷺ says to me, to you, don't begin until you sight. Somebody comes and say, forget about sighting. Let's have the criterion of the fact that the crescent is above the horizon on that night. So they change the criterion, and then that criterion they compute. And there are many criteria we can compute that are not consistent with the text. And briefly said, that's why it is very, very improper. It's a bid'ah. Now I can say it. And I am responsible for my words. It is a bid'ah munkara to begin the fast in that way. And it is haqq to begin the fast by sighting. And if you're so enamored by computation, you can compute the probabilities of sighting, and to a very high level degree of accuracy. And then, if on account of those probabilities in the United States, for example, or elsewhere, in the United States, it will be sighted. And if it will be sighted, people will go out and will sight it. Then you can say ahead of time, most likely the first day is this. But based on sighting criteria. not on anything else. You know, I use science also a lot. And for this year, for example, on Thursday evening, this is what it looks like, the probabilities of sighting the crescent in the world. The red zone means the moon in that evening, Thursday evening, will set, in those zones will set before the sun sets. And sometimes in these regions we have had reports that said they sighted it in many years. We cannot continue to do that. And the rest means that the crescent will set after the sun sets, but it is above the horizon in such a way that it is impossible to sight it by exact science. Impossible to sight it. And therefore, Ramadan cannot start on what? On Friday. This year, alhamdulillah, we have that resolved. The next day, that is on Friday evening. This is on Friday evening, May 26th. This is what it looks like over the world in accordance to these scientific computations of the probabilities of sighting the crescent. Where it is dark green means it is easily sightable for anybody who looks outside in clear skies to sight it. And that includes almost all of North America and South America, including us. And as we learn to practice here, we do our best also if the sky is clear to go out and watch for that, inshaAllah ta'ala. And note that, as I told you many times before, as it is the law of Allah in nature, that the further west you go towards Africa and Asia, the further west you go, the probabilities of sighting the crescent will increase or decrease? Will decrease. The sighting of going east, east this way, of going east towards Africa and Asia, going east, the further we go east, what happens? The probability of sighting the crescent will decrease. And as I told you, therefore, we can never in North America, on the basis of sighting, rely on those who are east of us. They should rely on us if they are interested in global sighting. They should follow us, not we follow them, because it doesn't make sense. It's illogical, it's unphysical, it's against the laws in nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, if it is sighted in the west, that doesn't mean it will be sighted in the east. But if it is sighted in the east, it will be more easily sighted in the west. So if in the west, where it is more easily sighted, factually and honestly was not sighted, then what does that mean of claims of sighting it in the east? Impossible. And that has happened so many times. And therefore, it seems, in accordance to these scientific probabilistic computations of sighting, that inshaAllah ta'ala, we say most likely, that's why we, alhamdulillah, we have to be careful. We want to truly obey Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that on the basis of that most likely Ramadan will begin on Sunday bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, And of course, on Saturday, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, that is the 27th, inshallah ta'ala. And of course, the next day is even more obvious. The next day, next evening is even more obvious. It just happens that the announcement of those who use computations on the basis of something else, not on the basis of sighting, also seems they have decided to begin fasting on Sunday, not because they have the right methodology, but lucky for them, it happens to be consistent with the sighting this month, because every month it's different. Every month is different. As we have seen before, in some months, the two can be very, very different. Completely different. Sometimes they are slightly different. Sometimes they are the same, like in this month, inshallah ta'ala. So what did they have to lose if they were more patient and waited and compute, if they are interested in computation, and they computed the probabilities of sighting instead of computing the birth of the moon? If they did that, they would be much more likely to be obeying directly and literally the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But by doing that, they have allowed themselves to be told, perhaps on the day of judgment, you have disobeyed the command. We, alhamdulillah, will not be said that way. Will not be told that way. Because what we do is exactly the sighting of the crescent. And if there is any computation that we consider to just make sure of the eyewitnesses' testimonies, that it is based on sighting. Now this is for Shawwal. This is for the evening of June 24th, which is a Saturday. This is what it looks like in accordance to these computations of the sighting probability. What do you see here? The green is where you feel safe, especially the dark green, and then the next level of it is where you feel safest. So what it is showing that in South America and in part of North America, if we are very strict, it is sightable. And if we increase this other green side, then it is even more probable. And it is. But where does the red region start? Here. What happens to to part of Africa and to Asia and most of Asia, including Saudi Arabia and India and all of that? There is no way to be sighted on that evening. And let's wait what was going to happen in a month. No way it's going to happen. If they want global sighting and they want to start, they have to follow whom? Follow us. We're in the West. But to claim that they would see it does not make sense factually. And the next day, this is what happens. So, most likely, in accordance to this for us, most likely, in accordance to this for us, and we will wait for sighting confirmation, that Eid would be on the June 25th. These people east from us, they should have Eid when? 26th, not 25th. If there is a chance for Eid to be on the 25th, and there is a big chance, it's for us. For them, there is no such a chance. That's a little bit extensive, but not too extensive. Remember, we have done sometimes hours explaining these things. But the next question of the fuqaha, بما يثبت al-shahr. And that is what we know. And alhamdulillah, to preserve both the facts of the reality of Allah in His laws of nature and to observe the text, our approach is the safest. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught also the Hilal of Shawwal, it's also either by sighting it, and if it is impossible to be sighted because of clouds or so, then we complete Ramadan 30 days, as he taught sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is what the fuqaha have always upheld, rahimahumullah ta'ala, in their unanimity, rahimahumullah ta'ala. In terms of ikhtilaf al-matali', that meaning that each community, and now I'm using the word community carefully, each community cites the crescent. And the community that cites it is bound to begin the fasting or end the fasting. That's called ikhtilaf al-matali'. That is the differences of the points of where the crescent rises. Ikhtilaf al-matali'. So the majority of the scholars, it seems, say لا عبرة باختلاف المطالع. In other words, we don't look at that. In other words, not each community performs the fast in accordance to its own sighting. If they did not cite it, then they don't. They say no. That's the majority of the scholars. If it is cited in a community, then the other community which did not cite it, but could cite it, and was citable, they still have to fast. Are you with me? That is, if a community, and I come to later, I'm using the word community. If a community cited the crescent, and other communities did not cite it, then, in accordance to this majority view, that other community that did not cite it must still fast in accordance to the citing of that community that cited it. That's the majority of the scholars. And there is another view which says, no, you don't have to do that. Be patient. Your question shall be answered, I know. Just be patient. There is a long discourse about that, but something that is rarely mentioned by the teachers sometimes, and some scholars, when they write or when they explain these things, or some imams, and that's why I use the word community. When our early scholars, rahimahullah ta'ala, said that, about this majority view, they meant, as I said, communities within the realm of all citability. Talking, let's say, about, in those days, an example, Plano and Dallas. Plano and Austin. Plano and Houston. And maybe somewhere in Oklahoma, or somewhere in Arizona. In other words, these that can fall within the same range of the rising of the crescent and the setting of the crescent, all in the same citability range. In other words, people can go out and try to cite the crescent in Plano, but they won't see it. But somebody in Irvine it was clear, they saw it. We are bound to fast with them. That's what they mean, which many people don't pay attention to. And to summarize all of that research for you of the scholars, for example, Imam Ibn Abd al-Barr, rahimahullah ta'ala. Imam Ibn Abd al-Barr, the great Muslim scholar of hadith and of fiqh and of usul and so on, who was from Al-Andalus, from Andalusia, from Spain in his time, and used to be known as the Bukhari of the West, because he was an encyclopedia of ilm and of hadith, rahimahullah ta'ala, and of ilm. He, in his great work of al-istidhkar or al-tamheed, which is an encyclopedic work in which he collected all the opinions basically and their evidence, textual evidence and otherwise, on all issues of fiqh. He wrote, rahimahullah ta'ala, and I'm quoting from al-istidhkar, he says, قَدْ أَجْمَعُوا. And he spoke before about what I'm telling you also about the opinion of the majority of the ulama to follow. The community follows another close community if they cited it in the other community. We don't have to cite it ourselves if we are in a community not very, very distant. And this is, he said, the opinion of the vast majority of the ulama, which is true. But he said, قد أجمعوا. After that he said قد أجمعوا أنه لا تراعى الرؤية, that is الرؤية that is in one community that is bound and that makes another community bound by that رؤية. أنه لا تراعى الرؤية فيما أخر من البلدان كالأندلس من خراسان. كالأندلس من خراسان وكذلك كل بلد له رؤيته إلا ما كان كالمصر الكبير وما تقاربت أقطاره من بلاد المسلمين والله أعلم. End of quote. So what does that mean? Some of you have heard this, of course, scholarly Arabic mentioned here. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, however, he said, it is a consensus, ijma', that is amongst the expert scholars, that when it comes to countries that are very distant from one another, countries or lands that are very distant from one another, that is, this citing of one community being obligatory in its consequence on another community does not hold. He says there is ijma' on that. There is consensus on that. And he gave an example, like in his time, Al-Andalus, Spain now, Al-Andalus and what? Khurasan. Where is Khurasan? In Asia. Iran now. And part of, the Muslim republics of former Soviet Unions. Part of Khurasan. He says, distances like that, if it is cited in Al-Andalus, they're not bound by it in Khurasan, and vice versa. This is amongst those who said that if it is cited in one community, the other community should begin fasting. They mean only when distances are relatively close, such as, the concept of the crescent rising and setting, in the same region of day and night, perhaps. And that's why he says, وَكَذَلِكَ كُلُّ بَلَدٍ لَهُ رُؤْيَتُهُ. Not only, like as an example, he gave Spain and Khurasan, but he says, and so, this is as an example, and anything that falls into the same example follows its own citing. That means, إِلَّا مَا كَانَ كَالْمِصْرِ الْكَبِيرِ, except that which is like a large land. Texas is huge. So wherever you see it in Texas, and you are in that same Misr, same balad, then it is, the others are bound by it as well. إلا ما كان كالمصر الكبير وما تقاربت أقطاره من بلاد المسلمين, or that which the distances between which of the lands of the Muslims are very near to one another. Even by this opinion, The United States is not bound by the sighting in Asia or in Africa. As another reason. What is the greater reason that we're not bound by that? First, we are in the West. Thank you. That's first of all the reason. We are in the West. They should be bound by us if they want. But in accordance to this, because they are so far, they don't have to be bound by us. In accordance to all of the opinions in this case, when summarized properly. Which doesn't happen usually. The next question, they deal with every little detail, rahimahumullah ta'ala, all expert scholars. What about they say, well, people went and sighted and they couldn't see within the region and the zone of sightability, of course. And one saw that. And one saw that. And he is sure that he has seen that. And again, within the zone of sightability. Sometimes your eyes play trick on you. But assume that's a fact. So they say, what does he do? And the others have not seen it. Must he fast? They say, it is said in accordance to the ulama, اتفق الأئمة أنه يصوم, that he does fast. If he personally cited that. But listen to that. As I said, where? In the zone of probable citability. Not in the zone of the impossible. If it is in the zone of the impossible and he said, I saw that, Jazakallah khair. But to us, no, you did not see that. Arkanus Sawm. What is required essentially in Sawm, in fasting? What must we not do or do? As you know, Hafizakumullah, first of all, Ruknus Siyam, the internal pillar of Siyam, of fasting, is to withhold from Al-Mufattirat. Al-Mufattirat, from the sunrise until sunset, right? Right? You're all doing right. No, wrong. Now, are you a Christian or a Jewish person who doesn't know Islam? And the authors write, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. No, we don't fast from sunrise to sunset. We don't write, as they say, they put it from sunrise to dusk. No, we don't fast from sunrise to dusk. We fast from dawn to dusk. Not sunrise. From dawn to dusk. From Fajr to Maghrib. Not from Tulu' al-Shams to Maghrib. You know. If you fast, if that's what you've been doing, some of you who nodded their heads, you were fasting all these years from sunrise, and then all these years you have to undo you have to fast again. We fast from dawn to sunset. And fasting means to withhold from what? From what? From what? No. First of all, we're talking about external fiqh. External fiqh. We withhold from what? Eating and drinking, right? Wrong. That's what we hold from. That's what the ulama put it as. We hold from mufattirat. Mufattirat, and many translate mufattirat as not eating and drinking. You know, mufattir is anything that breaks your fast. Mufattir, al-mufattirat. And it's not only eating and drinking, but also, as you know, if one entered into some other activities that are defined by law as breaking your fast, such as an intimate relationship sexually, for example. That would also eliminate and undo the fasting. Not only eating and drinking and other things as well, as many of you know, and perhaps we shall mention. So that's the rukn. The first rukn is to keep from mufattirat. And therefore I need to know what are the mufattirat besides eating and drinking water. What makes me violate my iftar, my siyam, if I do, in addition to eating or drinking. And that is, for example, entering into any sexual activity during, between dawn and sunset. That would render the siyam void. And I say sexual activity. Now it is, in modern language, this is more general than the intimate relationship. Anything that causes, for example, the body to discharge that which is known as sexual discharge by whatever means that happens, then that nullifies the fasting. Is that clear? Because we, alhamdulillah, we try to be, polite and we're not atheists and we're not people without haya. We explain our deen and the requirements of our deen still with haya. Muslims should not forget that, and students of ilm and teachers should not forget that. They should not make the teaching of the deen, even though they are facts, taught without haya, without bashfulness, and without reservation, moral reservation. We are not, as other people have chosen to be, obsessively descriptive about things. We should communicate the message as Rasulullah ﷺ used to do, obviously, but clearly or understandably, but not not obscenely. Thank you. Not obscenely. Not nowadays. Be very, very careful, man and women. We are, we're challenged in so many ways, in the way we speak, in the way we behave, in the way now we communicate our deen. We have been challenged so much, and we have still our freedoms. And because of that challenge, many, even teachers, have lost the sense of moral decency, of reservation morally and spiritually, and of bashfulness and of haya. We should communicate knowledge with haya. And Rasulullah ﷺ used to do, and as the Quran mentions to us, things of this nature, but in a language that is very morally reserved. Conveys the message, but teaches us at the same time that we have to be hayi. Aynan. The second rukn of siyam, the second inner essential pillar, essential pillar of fasting is an-niyyah, the internal drive, the internal intent inside of me. And all of the ulama, rahmahumullah ta'ala, seem to agree on this matter also, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Man lam yujmi' as-siyama qabla al-fajr, fala siyama lahu," as related by Imam Ahmad, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, An-Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and others, rahmahumullah ta'ala, when he said, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, the person who does not collect himself or herself before Fajr ends, or before Fajr begins, at night, the previous night, before the break of dawn, that is, collected himself or herself in his intent for the next day to fast, if he or she did not do that then his siyam doesn't count. See? That's something very mental and very spiritual. مَنْ لَمْ يُجْمِعِ الصِّيَامَ in Arabic, in English. The person who has not, in other words, let me put it Simply, the person who has not had the intent to begin the fast of the next day, he didn't have that the night before the break of dawn, right? Because that's when the siyam begins, then his fasting doesn't count. فَلَا صِيَامَ لَهُ, has no fasting. And that means that, of course, everybody does that unless one is crazy or majnoon or something of some very unusual circumstances. And that's why when you wake up for Salatul Fajr, and you know that you're fasting, you know that you're going to fast. That's what intent is. You don't have to utter it. It's what goes on inside of you, of intent, of drive towards what you are going to do. So make sure that, alhamdulillah, we are in that mode. We are in that mode. And of course, when you wake up, especially you wake up and you want to have suhoor, why do you wake up for suhoor? Because inside of you, the intent is to fast the next day. So the intent is already there. That's what it means by intent. Intent does not have necessarily to be pronounced in words. Intent is in the qalb. But this is for obligatory siyam, like the siyam of the month of Ramadan. But if one is fasting nafila, supererogatory fast, nafila, in accordance to the majority of the ulama, that one does not have to have that niyyah the night before. But if one woke up and, didn't eat anything yet and felt he or she wanted to fast this day, they can still do that. Even though they did not have the niyyah the night before, because this is not obligatory fasting. This is not Ramadan. In the nafila siyam, in accordance to, the majority of the ulama, because they say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once came to his home one day, and he asked the household, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, هل عندكم شيء? Is there anything to eat? First of all, listen to this. The household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, is there anything to eat? Allahu Akbar. They said, no, we don't have anything, Ya Rasulullah. Sayyida Aisha قالت لا. And then he said, then I am fasting. إذن فأنا صائم. First of all, the fiqh part of this is, in accordance to these expert scholars, that you may begin your fasting of the day as nafila fasting, supererogatory fasting. You may even begin it during the day. You don't have to have the niyyah the night before. But what is beautiful here is this conduct of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the busiest man on earth, very busy mind and spirit and kala, but of course his heart is an ocean of peace. But imagine some of us, with all the problems and the challenges of the world and the concerns and so on. Then you come home. Is there anything to eat? No, we didn't make anything. Oh, khalas. Talaq 3 times. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. No, some people do that. Ya Latif. But look at the response of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at his gentle response. He did not say, why didn't you make food? Not just any response. Even being quiet and not saying anything is a noble response. Alhamdulillah. But look what he says. He makes of a challenge an opportunity. He makes of an affliction, he makes of it an opportunity. So he says, I'm fasting. May Allah help us walk on his way. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah forgive us. The next question, من يرخص لهم في الفطر? who are permitted, those who have to fast during the month of Ramadan, who are permitted to not fast. And however, if they do not fast, in this case, the first question, they have to pay fidya. They have to atone for that, or instead of that, to do something else that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would require instead of fasting. And this case is al-fidya, which is it'amu miskin, is to feed a needy person. For every day one misses, fidya is to feed a miskin, a person in need. To feed them preferably in the way we regularly eat. Though in those old days they spoke of a mud of dates or a barley or so, something like that, which is something like less than a kilogram of these things. But nowadays, a person needy, if you give them a kilo or half a kilo or 700 grams of barley, what is he going to do with that in the United States? So you just best is to give to this needy person what feeds him or her for that day, or whatever the value of that is, in accordance to many ulama, especially in the Hanafi school. Who are these people? Again, the old man or woman. The old man or woman. Or the sick person for whom we do not have hope for recovery. Chronic disease, I'm sorry. In this case, these people, in accordance to the majority of the ulama, they do not fast, they do not have to fast, and for each day they give fidya as a form of the ibadah to Allah, because they cannot perform the ibadah of fasting. He subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a chance for the ibadah of what? Of giving, of charity. Because the mind, the nafs is greedy. We don't want to give. And Ramadan is about liberating ourselves. I'm already speaking about spirituality. The Ramadan is about liberating ourselves from the yokes and the chains of greed and of the nafs. So we cannot fast, then do something in this case that liberates me from greed and from the yoke of myself, to give what I like, to keep. To give what I like, to keep. So to give. And I just keep in mind that many things I tell you here are in general what is the prevalent opinions, but alhamdulillah, in our fiqh of these detailed matters, there are frequently differences amongst the scholars. Keep that in mind as well. Those differences are not differences of conflict and animosity. They are differences of diversity within unity. Keep that in mind. If you are interested in only a Hanafi opinion or a Shafi'i opinion or a Maliki opinion or Hanbali opinion, it is your right to practice that. But with the condition, don't think of the others as less than you. Don't do that. And that's very, very dangerous. And if you are able even to know more details of the law, you have the opinion of the majority of those. Maybe you would feel more comfortable with that. And that's usually also what I oftentimes also mention. I mention the opinions of different schools sometimes or most of the time, and the prevalent opinion as well. In this, I mentioned to you what the prevalent opinion is, but keep in mind, if you go to a Maliki country, North Africa, many parts of Africa and some parts of Europe and of Asia, etc., and people who follow the Maliki madhab. In the Maliki madhab, you would know that the Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, from the analysis of the text and of the practices of the predecessors, he said that for the old man and woman, they don't have to fast and they don't have to pay any fidya. In other words, they're not responsible for fasting. And if they're not responsible for fasting because of weakness and old age, this is not illness, weakness and old age, they don't have to fast and they don't have to pay any fidya. Because in other words, خطاب التكليف لا يشملهم. That is, the divine communication of obligation or of responsibility does not carry to them. Like this obligation of fasting does not include them to begin with, he's arguing. And because of texts and the practice of early scholars in Medina, etc. But keep that in mind as another opinion of our expert scholars of old. But the majority is that in this case, preferably is to give in fidya. And that's, look at it as liberating the heart from the yoke of possession. As to the person who is pregnant, the woman who is pregnant, and the nursing mother, in the month of Ramadan, what do they do? Of course, depending on what they know and the expert opinions of the doctors, and especially the Muslim doctors, what do they tell them and what they know of themselves, especially by experience? That in this case, if they fear for their health and or they fear for the health of the fetus, of the baby in the womb, then in this case they may not fast. No doubt about it. If there is probable cause, not necessarily certitude and yaqeen, but الظن الراجح, there is probable cause that it would do harm to her or to the baby, then definitely you don't have to wait for a court statement or to pass legislation. It's automatic. You don't have to argue it for years. You are your own judge. You are the court and you are the Congress. When it comes to these matters of your life is in danger, if you practice this worship, ibadah, then you don't have to. Because the intent by ibadah is to promote life and heart and mind and so on. And if in some circumstances that is jeopardized, surely or most probably, then the law, alhamdulillah, is said, you take the concessions, you take the rukhas. ما يفعل الله بعذابكم. Allah is in no need that you punish yourself or you suffer, masochistically. No, Allah is Rahim. Allah is merciful and compassionate. So in that case, you take the rukhsa. But the ulama have differed into the details of what to do. Some ulama say the only thing she does is to pay fidya and no qada. Some ulama said qada only and no fidya. Are you with me? Be open. They have all their reasons from the texts and the practices. And they are all those who abide by the book of Allah and the sunnah of Rasulullah. Now we're not, because I said this is a brief time, we're not going to give you the details of what's in the Quran and in the sunnah and how they came to those conclusions. But it's all from the Quran and the sunnah and the practice of our early predecessors. So the other opinion is qada only. Another opinion is even more complex, which says if this woman who is pregnant or feeding or nursing the baby, if there is probable cause of harm to the baby only, to the baby only, then the solution is both qada and fidya. And then makes it even more complex. And if probable cause is that it would do harm to both of them or to the woman only, then there is qada only. See, it's already too many choices. Just to see the diversity of opinions in this matter by our early expert scholars. This last one that I mentioned to you is held by Imam Ahmad and Imam Shafi'i. The one before that was held by Imam Abu Hanifa. And the one before that was held by other scholars. And I told you what, and Imam Malik, and I told you what Imam Malik in the case of the old woman and old man said. And therefore, if you belong to a school of Ahnaf and you want to be strict about that, the solution for that is make up your days. That's in the Hanafi opinion, whatever it is, hubla or murda'. You make up what you missed. Right? If you're of those who follow Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, then it is only fidya. And if you are of the rest, I told you that other complication. Whether she is concerned about herself only or herself and the child or the child only. Depends. So that's depending on the school you want to subscribe to. But I would feel, of all of these, wallahu ta'ala, I would feel very comfortable in this case with the opinion of the Ahnaf. That is, qada. Without fidya. But alhamdulillah, if she feels, alhamdulillah, she wants to do more khair, and she wants to apply all the schools of thought together, then she does qada and fidya. In this case, you have abided by all of them. You have pleased, inshallah ta'ala, all the criteria of all the schools together, all of them will pray for you. And if you chose one of them, they will still all pray for you, inshallah ta'ala. But that's the way to take it, inshallah ta'ala. In other words, either qada, and it is very fine, or qada and fidya, about which everyone would agree. Some of our teachers used to teach us, Sayyidi rahimahullah ta'ala, Muhammad Amin, that saintly scholar, used always to teach to the serious students, always amongst the opinions of the scholars, to take the safest course. And the safest course is that which preserves all of them as much as you can. And in my opinion, this answer preserves all of them. And because of those who want also to tame and discipline the nafs, this is more consistent with disciplining the nafs. Making up and giving fidya. The nafs wants to do usually the easiest way. And sometimes the easiest way is the Shar'i way. In this case, it is still Shar'i. But in general, the nafs wants always to follow the easy course, and the easiest course which might end up to be very dangerous, spiritually speaking. As you know, to the person who is sick, and not chronic sickness, not chronically sick, or a person who is traveling, as you know by the Quran text as well, that this person may not fast, and he or she has to make up those days missed later after Ramadan. And that, I think, all of you know, the person who is ill of any sort of illness, but for which there is a cure, inshallah, there are just a few days or a few weeks or a month or so, whatever, but there is hope for healing, alhamdulillah. That person would simply make up the days missed. Or the traveling person who chooses not to fast during traveling, because traveling might be a little bit cumbersome or hard or inconvenient, or depending sometimes quite maybe difficult for sometimes, then she or he may not eat, but have to, may not fast, but have to make that up later, as you know. As to the woman who is in her menses or in post-delivery, al-nufasa, al-ha'id wal-nufasa, in this case they must not fast. Up to this point we were speaking of, they may not fast. Now it is, they must not fast. Al-ha'id wal-nufasa. That is, the woman in her menses and the woman who has just delivered a baby. يجب عليهم الفطر, and to make what they missed, to make that up later. Al-qada. This is an agreement amongst all the ulama in interpreting the book of Allah and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. How do you feel? It's already an hour spent. It's very quick. How do you feel? Do you need a break? Okay. Let's take a short recess, inshallah ta'ala, and we come back exactly at 3:45, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair.